Hi, I'm your host, and this is my channel. And we have another super exciting episode of history, British and American Today. Now, before we get started, I did want to let you know that there will be no episode next week because it is Christmas week, and I just thought I would take a little break, spend some time with my family. Well, we're back to the regular schedule after that. Anyway, I hope you all had a wonderful Christmas, a wonderful New Year, and you're all ready for 2023. I know I am. So today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to look at 5 interesting British people reacting to America and American culture. Now, by no means is this a comprehensive list, but I think these are 5 very interesting perspectives from British people about their experience in the United States and how they perceive it differently to perhaps how we Americans see it. So without further ado, let's get started. Number 1. Let's start with a quote from famed British actor and comedian Benny Hill. Now, he was born in 1904 in England, and he died in 1978. So he lived a long life, most of it in England, but he did visit America quite often. And he once said, quote, "In England, the speaker at a public meeting always has to wait until he can hear a pin drop. In America, the speaker waits until he can hear a plane take off." Now, what's so funny about this quote is that when you think about it, it's actually pretty true. You know, we Americans, we love our planes. And when you go to an American city, especially if it's near an airport, you can definitely hear those planes taking off. They're loud. And, you know, it's something that we probably don't even notice anymore because we're used to it. But to somebody who's coming from England and not used to hearing planes take off, that must be a jarring noise. So it's funny that he picked up on that and decided to make it into a joke. No. 2. This one comes from British author Aldous Huxley, who was born in 1894 and he died in 1963. He was a novelist and a poet and a playwright and a very prolific writer. And he also made some interesting comments about America and Americans. Once famously saying, quote, "America is the land of opportunity and also the land of organized discouragement of anyone who tries to make use of opportunities." Now, what he meant by this was that America does offer a lot of opportunity, especially in the early days, for people who come here from other countries. And there are many people who have stories like this. They come from, say, Europe or Asia or wherever, and they come to America and they find a lot more freedom here, a lot more opportunity than they had back home. And they feel like they can really start a new life here. But then there's also the flip side, which is that sometimes America doesn't make it easy for people who are trying to come here and try to make something of themselves. There are many immigrants who came to America, probably had a rough time of it. You know they didn't find it all sunshine and roses, but they were still better off than if they had stayed in their home country. So I do kind of like this quote because it acknowledges both sides of that coin. No. 3. British politician and soldier, Field Marshal Montgomery. He was born in 1887 and died in 1976. He was famous for his role in World War II, specifically the invasion of Europe. And after the war, he went on to become Chief of Staff of the British Army and then commander of NATO's ground forces in Europe. So he had a very distinguished career. And he once said, quote, "The American has a natural distrust of all things military. To him, a soldier is almost a mythical figure like an eagle or a cowboy." Now, I do think there is some truth to this. When you look at some of the other countries in the world, especially over in Europe, you find that the people there are much more familiar with soldiers. They see them on the street more often. It's just part of daily life. Whereas in America, we really don't have that. Our military is very much hidden away. We don't see them unless there's a parade or something like that. So the average American, they really don't have any interaction with the military, with soldiers. So it's easy to see why Montgomery would say that Americans are almost mythical when it comes to soldiers. But I do think that in modern times, that is changing a little bit. As more and more women and minorities join the military, you'll see them out in public more often, and that will continue to normalize the idea of the soldier in America. No, 4. let's go to British author Evelyn Waugh, who was born in 1903 and died in 1966. He was also a novelist and a poet and a playwright, and he was known for his satirical and comic novels. He wrote some great books. And he once said, quote, "American women have a curious habit of rushing towards the altar at the first attainable opportunity, then rushing away from it for the rest of their lives." Now, what he meant by this, of course, is that in America, when young girls, they get married, right? That's kind of the traditional path. You go to school, you meet boys, you get married, you have children, and it's assumed that you're going to stay married and live happily ever after. That's, the fairy tale. But the reality is that nowadays people get divorced all the time. Even if they are, teenagers, young adults, you hear about these couples getting divorced. And it's really not uncommon at all anymore. So I think, he was satirizing that a little bit, pointing out that in England, that wasn't necessarily the case. It was more frowned upon. It was less common. But now, of course, divorce is everywhere. And he was being sarcastic and saying, well, you rush to get married and then you rush away from it. And that is the way it goes. No 5? We'll finish with British actor and comedian Peter Cook. He was born in 1935 and died in 1995. And he once said, quote, "If you have a drink with an American, he buys the first one. If you have 2 drinks with him, you buy the second. By the 3rd drink, you're in Canada." Now, that's a very funny quote, right? I mean, it paints a picture of how, maybe in England, if you go drinking with somebody, it's assumed that you're both going to pay your way equally. Like, you each buy a round or whatever. But in America, it's kind of like you buy the first round, and then the next person buys the next round. And then if you hang out with somebody long enough, eventually you end up in Canada. And I don't know exactly what that means. Maybe that's where you get drunk and end up. But I do think that's a funny image. I'm not sure if that's really true. Maybe it's a little exaggerated. But certainly, when I hear Americans talking about drinking, they do often mention buying rounds of drinks for people and stuff like that. So, I think it is partially true. But again, he's exaggerating it for comedic effect. All right, everyone, that wraps up this episode of I'm From the Channel. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of this one. Would you like to see more episodes like this in the future? If you liked it, please give me a thumbs up. It helps the show out a lot. Also, don't forget to subscribe. We're almost at 100,000 subscribers. So I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next week for a brand new episode.